Sophie's singing this morning, so we're up at 5:30.
We've been grocery shopping.
We went grocery shopping up there.
We went grocery shopping, the cars washed.
Yes, yes, we'll be here at 10 o'clock.
We'll be here.
All the He brings a message to us. Father, as we go through our lives, and it seems like there's so many people dealing with the crud going on, I just pray for a quick healing for them. Father, we pray that you would continue to work through our church here at Owensville as we seek out those who are lost in this community. I pray that you give us wisdom as leaders, as your body here. Father, I pray that you would be glorified through the things that we say and do this morning. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Kiddos on downstairs, you can bring that at this time. Kiddos on downstairs, you can bring that at this time. And also, we have a high school class in the back with Sarah this morning. Sarah Mortland this morning. And so if you guys want to head to those places. And everybody else, if you go ahead and open up to Matthew chapter 5, verses 15, or pardon me, chapter 5, verses 21 to 32. It's on page 1506 of your Pew Bible, 1506 of your Pew Bible this morning. We're going to continue on our study of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 through 32. You know, I like to think of myself as a good person. I like to think of myself as a good person. I think most people like to think of themselves as good people. I don't know that everybody thinks of themselves as a good person, but I like to think of myself as a good person. And I like, you know, I get up in the morning and, you know, shave and look in the mirror and think about who am I, you know, and think about how I'm a good person. And you know, there's a list of things that I do when I go through about being a good person. You know, I think about how, you know, I'm a good father, and I'm a good husband, and I'm a good pastor, and I'm a good this, and I'm a good that, and then I've got my news briefing. You guys have a little news briefing maybe on your phone or something that goes in the morning. You got a news briefing in the morning, and the news briefing helps you to think about how you're a good person. It helps you to think about how you're a good person, because not only with the all the things about what I do, there's all the things that I don't do that I think about a good person. You know, here comes on the news feed. They talk about some sort of mass shooting or something else going around, and they may sit here and say, well, you know, I may not be the best person in the world, but I'm not like those darn murderers out there. That's terrible. Terrible stuff. You know, and then the next thing that comes on is, of course, there's got to be some political sex scandal. You know, that's got to be something every week. You know, and I sit here and think about, you know, I may not be the best husband all the time, but I'm not like that guy. You know, I'm not somebody who's committed adultery. I'm not that guy. You know, and so when we come to Matthew chapter 5, when we're going to Matthew chapter 5, Jesus, on the Sermon on the Mount, he's had these folks, these Charlie Buckets who've been there on the mountain, who've come to him. And he started out his sermon, saying, guys, don't get the wrong impression. Don't get the wrong impression here. I haven't come to lower the standard. I've come to raise it. I've not come to abolish the law. I've come to fulfill it. Guys, if you think that you're going to come here and follow me, and that means doing less, somehow getting permission to continue life the way you are, let me tell you something. I've called you to be more righteous than the Pharisees and the religious leaders. I've called you to be more righteous than the preachers and the Bible school professors. You know, so that's how he starts out. He calls them, he says that he's not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. And then what happens is this, is here, as in the section we look at today, he picks out the first two. He picks out the first two commands that we go ahead, that a lot of us, or many of us, would be able to use in the morning to declare ourselves good people. And I get up in the morning and I go and say, well, you know, I may have not done well yesterday. I may have not been the best person in the world yesterday, but I was a good person. I mean, listen to these guys on the news. I mean, at least I'm not a murderer. At least I haven't committed adultery. And Jesus comes here in this particular setting in Matthew 5, looking at these couple of commands which we get up in the morning and are pretty darn sure we haven't broken. And he goes and he says, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure you followed even those commands? He goes, look what he says here. So Matthew chapter 5, verse 21. He starts out and he says, "You've heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'You shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment.' But I tell you," now let's stop there for just a minute. Okay, all right. Think about this for a minute, okay? Where did we hear that? He said, "You've heard that it was said to people long ago, 'You shall not murder.'" We know where we heard that. Where did we hear that? Somebody tell me. It's not a rhetorical question. 10 Commandments, Moses. I heard that out there. The 10 Commandments, Moses. Now, I want you to think about this for a minute. Here's the deal. Where did we hear this? We heard about "you shall not murder." We heard this from the 10 Commandments. Moses brought it down from Mount Sinai. Remember, there's a burning mountain that nobody was allowed to be on, not man or animal, except for Moses. And he went up there, and he went with God, and God took the 10 Commandments, and he took this particular law, and with the finger of God, God wrote on stone tablets this command, which Moses brought back down to the people. And now, you're sitting there up on a hill, and then there's this man, Jesus, and he starts out in his sermon and says, "Now you've heard that it was said, 'You shall not murder,' but I tell you," who in the world do you think you are? God? Well, as a matter of fact. I mean, it's pretty audacious for Jesus to start out this sermon. I mean, if you were sitting there hearing this for the first time, and hearing that preacher for the first time, then you'd be sitting up listening. What in the world is he going to say next? It says, "You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'You shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment.' But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, 'Raka,' that means empty head or idiot, is answerable to the court or the Sanhedrin," literally, Sanhedrin. "And anyone who says, 'You fool,' will be in danger of the fire of hell." Now, as we have to go into the Sermon on the Mount here, we have to think about what sort of rhetorical devices Jesus uses here. And one of the rhetorical devices that Jesus uses is something called hyperbole. Hyperbole is something where we use exaggeration in order to make a point. Now, let me give you for instance, okay? This is not a great for instance, but this is a for instance to get the point across about the rhetorical device, I may have gone to Walmart the day before the snowpocalypse, and that's hyperbole, by the way. But may have gone to Walmart the day before the snowpocalypse and gone in there, and everybody was there. And so I come home and say, "Sweetheart, I went to Walmart, and there was 1 million people there." Well, I don't really mean that there was 1 million people there, but I am making a specific point. My point is that there was more people than you could count. There was a lot of people in Walmart. So Jesus starts out this deal. He says, "You've heard that it was said." He said, "You've heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit murder.' But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother or sister will be subject to judgment. And anyone who says to a brother or sister, 'Raka,' or empty head, idiot, is answerable to the court," the Sanhedrin. Now, the Sanhedrin, that was the Jewish Supreme Court. These were a group of guys that dictated everything that went along with the Jewish culture. And so, now imagine this, okay? So Jesus gives us imagery. Imagine this. He goes and says, all right, so you take your neighbor to court. Okay, you take your neighbor to lower court, and you don't get the answer that you want, and so you appeal it to a higher court. You go to federal court, and you appeal it to federal court, and you don't get the answer you want there, and you appeal it again, and then it goes to the Supreme Court. So now you're standing in front of the highest court in the land. In the highest court in the land, you go to them and you say, "Hey, I've got an issue with my neighbor." And you have an issue with your neighbor. They go and the judges look down at you and they say, "All right, sir, ma'am, what is the issue you have with your neighbor?" And you say, "Well, most honorable judges, this is my issue with my neighbor. My issue with my neighbor that I've come today and appealed up through the courts for is that my neighbor called me an idiot." Well, if you did that and got to the Supreme Court, you'd probably get called an idiot several more times by the judges that were there. Jesus uses this answer and says that, hey, you call somebody an idiot, you may be subject to the court. And he says, you call somebody a fool and you'll be in danger of fire of hell. Now, we know Jesus is using some hyperbole here. We know that because here just a few chapters later, in chapter 23, verses 16 through 17, this is what Jesus says. He says, woe to you blind guides, this is in your bulletin. You say, if anyone swears by the temple, it means nothing, but anyone who swears by the gold of the temple is bound by that oath. Now he uses the exact same word in verse 17. He says, and blind fools, he uses the very word himself that he used there in Matthew 5. Which is greater, the gold of the temple that makes the gold, which is greater, the gold or the temple that makes the gold sacred? Okay. So here Jesus is using hyperbole. He's going to continue to use some hyperbole throughout this sermon. And it's important to identify it. But it's important that even though we hear hyperbole here, we don't just throw out what Jesus is saying. Instead, Jesus is making a very real point. What is the point that Jesus is saying? Is Jesus simply saying, you better not call your neighbor an idiot? You better not call your neighbor a fool? No, what he's saying is this. He's saying, you can murder people with your thoughts and words. You know, the good Pharisee, the good teacher of the law, the regular good Jew, got up in the morning and he went through the Torah and he was thinking about God's laws, and he thought about, well, I may have broken this one and I may have broken that one, but I sure haven't broken this one, murder. I haven't broken this one, murder. And Jesus flips the script here. He goes and he says, you know, you've heard it said, do not murder. Let me tell you something. Let me tell you, you can murder people with your thoughts and your words. And that's sinful too. That's a pretty high standard. Pretty high standard. It goes on further, and this next part is pretty surprising to me. See if you catch it here. All right, so Jesus here, he goes and he says, you know, he gives this deal about murdering people with your words and your thoughts. Okay, so what would you think the next thing would be that he would tell us to not do? You know, right? Just hold that in the back of your mind. What would be the next thing you would expect him to say? And now, think about what you would expect him to say. And now let's hear what he actually says. In verse 23. Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, and then come and offer your gift. Now that's weird. I didn't think he was going to go that direction. What he does, he comes and he says, okay, he gives you this bit, and he talks about, you know, hey, you can murder people with your words and your thoughts. And so the next thing he says is, so, if you're in church, and you know that you've done something to make somebody else angry, go ahead and just, in the middle of church, I mean, it's that urgent. It doesn't matter what you're doing that time. In the middle of the church, get up and go and reconcile yourself to that person. Get up and go and reconcile yourself to that person. Now that's super surprising to me. I didn't think he was going to go that direction. I thought he'd go something like this. Here I thought he was saying that not only physically killing someone is wrong, but killing someone with your thoughts and your words is wrong. So I'd expect his next statement be something along the lines of this, like, therefore, don't hold a grudge, instead hold your tongue. You know, I thought, wouldn't that be real pithy to put in there, you know, don't hold a grudge, instead hold your tongue. But instead, Jesus goes this other route. He goes and he says, look, guys, don't you realize that holding and being angry, man, it's so easy to be distracted with the light, isn't it? I'm sorry, guys, and I'll probably take that down before next service. Why it hasn't been changed in the last days is that it ain't the light bulb, it's the fixture. And so we've had some problems with there, and it'll go fine for a while, and then it won't. So, and you guys want to tackle that, feel free. Okay? But not during the service, please. We have enough of distractions as it is, okay? But here's the deal, is that Jesus goes with this particular issue, and he goes and he says, all right, he says, don't you realize that holding a grudge, being angry with your neighbor, that can lead to judgment? Don't you realize that you can murder somebody with your words and your thoughts? That murder isn't just something physically you do. So, if you've done something that makes somebody angry, given them legitimate cause to be angry with you, reconcile before they're in danger of hell. Let me do that math again. The idea is this, is that if somebody goes and he does something to you, and you hold a grudge, well, that puts you in danger of hell. If someone does something and they do something to you, and you decide to murder them with your words, well, that's sin as well. So if I've done something that has caused you anger, then it is partly my responsibility to make sure that I reconcile with you so that you're not in danger of sinning. That's all. That's like up here as a standard. You know, I thought when I read that command, reading the command, thou shalt not murder, I thought that command was about not harming my neighbor. Instead, what Jesus turns us around to is about caring for your neighbor. We're going to skip to the end here just for a second, to the end of the sermon. I want you to get an idea of this at the end of the sermon. Matthew 7:12 says, "So in everything, do to others what you have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets." Do to others as you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. That when Jesus looks at the law and the prophets, when He looks at the things that God has commanded us to do and not to do, it's not a list of don't. It's a list of how I care for my neighbor. Now it goes on. And He gives the more obvious reasons here in 23 and 24 that I thought He would have given in the first place. I'm sorry, in 25 and 26. He says, "Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you are still together on the way, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. Truly I tell you, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny." So here the Pharisees look at the commandment to not murder, and they check it off their list for the day. Never physically killed anyone, so I must be good on that one. But Jesus gives even stricter rules and says, if we harbor a grudge or destroy someone with our words, then we are subject to judgment. And if we give someone a reason to hold a grudge against us or speak ill of us, then both us and the person who we have harmed stand in danger of judgment because of the crime we committed. Now, Jesus' standard of righteousness goes way beyond what anybody had interpreted the law. Nobody else would have interpreted that law and said, do not murder. Well, what does that mean? Well, do not murder means if I made my neighbor angry, then I need to reconcile with my neighbor. That's the sort of standard that Jesus holds us to. Now, as we go through this in the Sermon on the Mount, this should be the impression that you get. As you go through the Sermon on the Mount, and as we read the Sermon on the Mount, if we get the Sermon on the Mount, we should get the impression of who in the world can live with this third standard. And that's part of the very point. We should be going through there and going and saying, even if the rules in the Bible, even if the laws in the Bible that we see, as it turns out, the rules that we thought were simple are not so simple. How in the world am I going to live God's standard? The answer is you can't. Not on your own, you can't. You can't. But we need a Savior, and we need grace, and we need mercy. But let's make sure, as we talked about last week, that grace and Savior and mercy does not give us license to lower the standard. Instead, it empowers us to meet the standard. Who can act this way but God? Well, that's part of the reason why in the Beatitudes that Jesus starts out this very section and says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God." How far we went to go to be reconciled to our brothers and sisters identifies us as God's children. Am I making sense this morning? I know this is a little bit complex, okay? I know it's a little complex, but it is something you can follow. And I think if we don't get the complexity, then we're going to miss it. The very point of this is that the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, they looked at God's word without complexity. They looked at God's word and said, well, don't murder, that means don't murder, check that one off. Instead of looking about God's intent, where does that point to? It points to reconciliation with their neighbor. So the first one, don't murder. Got that one checked off, no problem. Now here's the next one, verse 27. You've heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. Again, where was that said? Ten Commandments, that's right. Same thing, same audacity. You've heard that it was said, do not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. I'll say that again. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Now that's not the standard the world has. The standard the world has goes something like this. You know, you can look at the menu as long as you don't order. Well, I haven't heard it. The standard the world had is this, is the standard is that as long as you don't touch it, it's a big deal. But Jesus, what he does is he goes ahead and he says that anyone looks at a woman lustfully, he has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Now let's remember this about this heart deal. This heart deal is not the seat of feeling, it's the seat of the will. You remember that? Remember that. Whenever we get in Scripture, we get all tied up knots and messed up theologically when we don't remember that the heart is the seat of the will and not the seat of the feelings. The seat of the feelings is your stomach and your bowels. Right? They have a better understanding of anatomy in biblical times. Because, hey, when you feel something, generally speaking, you feel it here. I mean, this may speed up, but you feel it here. You know. Instead, the heart has a rhythm. A-bum, 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 a-bum. It's the seat of the will, the seat of progress, the seat of moving forward. And so when Jesus says, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart, means that what he's already done is he's willed it to be so. Let me just put it a different way, okay? All right. Whenever you're looking at crime shows, I don't know if this is the right thing in all reality, because I haven't been a detective, nor have I slept at a Holiday Inn Express lately. It's an old joke, old commercial. Anyway, but when you're looking at crime dramas and they're looking for the person who committed the crime, what are the three things they're looking for? Can anybody tell me at least one of them? Motive, means, opportunity. There we go. Motive, means, and opportunity. That's what they're looking for. Motive, means, and opportunity. Well, in the situation when it comes to a lust, well, you may not have the means and you may not have the opportunity, but you do have the motive. You follow me? In lust, what you're going and you're saying is, if they were willing and I wouldn't get away with it, I'm okay with this happening. But nobody would know. I wish that this would happen. But Jesus holds us to a higher standard. He goes and he says, hey, it's not just about what you do. It's about what you think, what you choose to be. Notice it says, look, the person who's committed adultery, or, pardon me, the person who lusts after a woman has already committed adultery with her in his heart. I want you to think about this for a moment too, before we go and we say, well, you know, these standards that Jesus has, you know, they're just outlandish. They're just way out here. They have no connection with the actual commands themselves. Well, think about it for a minute, okay? Let's think about this for just a minute. This generally, unless you're an absolute psychopath, you know, you just get up one morning and decide, I think I'm going to murder somebody today. No. You don't think you're going to murder somebody today. What you do instead is somebody has harmed you. You think somebody has harmed you in some way, and you've got anger, and you've got anger today, and you've got anger tomorrow, and you've got anger next week, and you get anger until you just get to a point where you say, you know what? This person's got to die. Sounds like I've done this before. Do you think that adultery just happens one day? Do you think that, you know, married couples, one just person wakes up in the morning and says, you know what, I think I'm going to cheat on my spouse today? No, what happens is it goes from looking at a man or looking at a woman and thinking to yourself, man, that would be nice. That would be nice if I had them in bed. That would be nice if I had them in bed. That would be nice if I had them in bed. You think about it over and over and over and over and over again until one day you do have the means and opportunity. See, part of the thing is this, as Jesus said, you saw this command, the outcome of this command was do not murder. The command was do not commit adultery. And what I call you to is not to keep stepping closer to it, as close as you can get to the line before you do it. Instead, what I'm calling you is to run the other direction. Don't say, I want nothing to do with murder. I'm going to make sure that I don't hold a grudge against people, that nobody's got a reason to hold a grudge against me. I don't want to commit adultery. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the other direction. I'm going to make a covenant with my eyes. I'm going to make sure that I never have the means and opportunity to commit adultery. It calls us to a higher standard. That's part of the problem. Part of the problem is when we come to God's commands, we're going to inch closer and closer to the edge. See just how close you can get to the light and still wake up in the morning and say, I'm a good person and I haven't done this, or this. And so what is the solution that Jesus has? Well, the solution that he has here in verse 29 is radical. It is radical. You can't miss the radicalness about it. He says in verse 29, if your right eye, in the Middle East, everything on the right hand, the right side is the good side. So you might as well say if your good eye, if your right eye causes you to sin, and this causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand, your good hand, causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. Now again, Jesus is using hyperbole. We know he's using hyperbole because we know that would work. What I mean is this, I'll give you an example, is that Stephen Hawking, who has passed away, I think, last year, and I'm not maligning him in any way, he's a famous scientist who had ALS, so that near the end, all he could do is twitch his cheek. That's the way he communicated, was twitching his cheek. Stephen Hawking was divorced and married 3 times, all of which after he had already had ALS. Now, what's my point about that? I'm not maligning Stephen Hawking anyway, but my point is you can cut off a guy's hands and you can cut off his eyes, and he can still figure out a way to lust. So what is Jesus getting to here? This hyperbole. What is the point that he's getting to here? He's saying Jesus is using hyperbole to get to the point that he's saying get rid of whatever causes you to sin, even if it feels like it's part of you. Get rid of whatever's causing you to sin, even if it feels like it's part of you. Give me an answer. maybe it's not our hand that causes us to sin. I mean, obviously, when he says right hand and right eye, if you sin, how are you going to pick which eye it was? Right hand and right eye. Well, getting rid of that's not going to help us with lust. That's not going to help us with lust. But what if we got rid of our TVs? Oh, what if we got rid of our TVs? Oh, wait a minute, I can't get rid of my TV. People in third world countries have TVs. It's like my right hand. It's like my right eye. Get rid of my TV. What if we got rid of our TV? Why is it? Why is it that, this is kind of crazy. Why is it that we need a metal and plastic box in order to survive? I mean, we make more of them every day, and we make smaller ones too. I've got one right here in my pocket. Here's the thing. Who sells us sex more than TV? If you had somebody who came into your house and acted and talked like the people we watch on TV, would you let them stay in your house? Now, some of you are going to say, well, I can't get rid of my TV. I watch the news and nature shows, and I watch documentaries, and I just have kid shows for the kids and entertain my kids. I use it as fellowship. We sit together and watch